What we are trying to do here today is simply record the experiences of 6 of the people, the more active members of the society so far, discuss it, try to understand it better, and so on. And we are also recording it for posterity, which will this recording will go on the society's website. So I will only do a slight variation on the order that is already listed by asking Frank to go first, so that we can then turn the projection equipment off, and then we will follow the order that is presented. I won't introduce speakers in any great detail, but simply to say that Frank Cunningham of the University of Toronto will go first, followed by Ken Collier of Athabasca University, Lorne Brown of University of Regina, Marjorie Cohen of Simon Fraser University, Bill Carroll of the University of Victoria, and Elaine Coburn from Glendon campus of York University. So, Frank, the floor is yours.
In the late 18th century, the philosopher Immanuel Kant shocked and amazed his contemporaries by announcing, actually observing, the obvious fact that whatever is actual must be possible. Now, it is hard for philosophers to get their minds around this, but it's also hard for a lot of other people to do it as well. So I think that there's a lesson to be learned for all the learned societies, as we used to call them, and indeed, probably for our continuing work. And for that matter, I bet it spills out of scholarship and into actual social movements, that we have actually accomplished something. Socialist studies can pride itself on certain accomplishments, and I'm listing them here. So these are things that are actual. If they're actual, they ought to be possible. The first one, keep on trucking, refers to our longevity. It's incredible to me to realize that we're like at around 50 years, half a century. I mean, entire socialist regimes in the world have risen and fallen in that amount of time. And yet, we stuck with it. And you can keep on tracking. The second principle, exhibited in actual practice by us, is that we have successfully challenged the walls of Jericho. And what I mean by that is we are, without question, the most cross and interdisciplinary, and for that matter, even non-disciplinary or something, society in all of the Congress. No one else comes close. And we've been that from the absolutely very beginning of the Society for Socialist Studies. We do not attend to the walls, the boundaries between disciplines, and in fact we thrive on nurturing interactions between them. I was reviewing the session here. I found how few of our sessions had panels which were composed entirely of people from a single discipline. Most of them are on several disciplines, and the topics themselves very often defy classification. The third, let 100 flowers bloom. And that is the actual Mao quote. It's not 1,000. He wasn't that ambitious. Let 100 flowers bloom. That is our diversity. And it's been another great strength of socialist studies that it is diverse. It's diverse not just in terms of the disciplinary orientations, but politically it's diverse. That you could have, of the 4 people who tacked that first notice up on the board in Carleton in, what year was it, 67? Saying people who want to come to and talk about the real world should join us in room such and such at Carleton. You know, I went to that room when it was at Carleton, and it's been changed, it's been gentrified, it's been turned into some audio-visual thing, and you have to have a special pass to get into it. So, at any rate, come to this room. It included two of the 4 people. One was Stanley Ryerson, then ideological head of the Communist Party of Canada, and the other was Ed Broadbent. And it was not too long before he entered politics. So if you can get Ryerson and Broadbent, and the others were Chandler Davis, who's a left-wing mathematician, and Ian Lumsden, who wrote Close the 49th Parallel. If anyone knows how to find Ian, I'd like to know. I've had trouble tracking him now. The last I heard, he was in Mexico someplace. So we see that's always been seen as a strength, that diversity, the fact that we cover the bold shall inherit the earth. What I mean by that is that this has always been a socialist organization, proudly self-described, straight through. And in fact, its first name, when 2 years after Lumsden and so on had called the first meeting, its first name was the Committee on Socialist Studies, COSS. But not too long after that, getting into I forget exactly when, toward the later 70s, we decided that that's ambiguous, because Committee on Socialist Studies is like Sovietology or Marxology. It's like we're a society studying. That's not what we meant. We didn't mean that it was to just be studying socialists, much as you would study creatures in a zoo. We meant that it was actually socialist. So that's when we changed the name. So there was no opposition whatsoever. There was enthusiasm to Society for Socialist Studies. So it's now that proud declaration of socialism is again, it runs against the grain. Certainly in today's world, all the way through the more conservative periods, the neoliberal periods, and so on, when people tried to find euphemistic ways of describing themselves other than socialists, we never tried to do that. We called ourselves socialists from the beginning. And not only that, it hasn't turned anybody off. Au contraire. If I'm not mistaken, and I've never done a study of this, but somebody should, I think that our sessions are amongst the very have the largest audiences. We have the largest numbers of people, and again, from a lot of different, of any of the others on average and overall. You'd have to, I don't know how to test that. That's what Lumsden, Davis, Broadbent, and Ryerson discovered when they posted this notice up, and they had just found some room that I think held 20 people. And it couldn't, just say, people want to talk about the real world, come to this room. That's all it said. And they were swamped. They had to find another room. That very first time, they had to find another room. It's always been that way. So the bold shall inherit the earth, won't we? And the last point, of course, is from Marx's famous declaration, the thesis of Feuerbach, and that is, the point is to change the world. And that means that although we draw, always, all of the sessions draw on scholarship and deep scholarship, all of them are also engaged. There are no sessions in today's, in this year's Congress or in any other that I can recall. There's no session which is not trying to relate itself to the what is to be done question, one way or another, whether oppositionally or proactively or any of the rest of it. So it is a society, notwithstanding its diversity, notwithstanding the fact that we have across these disciplines and so on, that wants, in a kind of a unified way, actually to have some impact on the world. So you can turn that off now, so it doesn't blind people.
Did you stop? Sorry, I didn't get to.
First, I wanted to make sure that we mention once again, and hope that we will continuously mention Jesse and Alice Vorst. I know that Lorne, for one, is going to talk a bit about them. I think it's only fair to say that when you got Jesse, you also got Alice. She did quite a lot of the background material behind socialist studies. She often was the person at the table, making sure that people knew each other, that the records were up to date, that you preferably paid, and your dues were there. Or on occasion, if you didn't happen to have any money, that she apparently had the power or took the power to waive the fees and said, come on in anyway. But I think she was a little on the strict side about the financial aspect. I didn't have a lot of stuff sort of prepared for this. I probably first heard of the when it was still a learned society back around 1980 or 82. Congress came to Saskatoon, and I was there doing something else as a social worker in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Regina, and lo and behold, there was a note about socialist studies that somebody had, so that's how I got hooked onto it. So I was just thinking that adds up to 30-some years of being connected to socialist studies one way or another. One note that I thought was important to think about with the Society for Socialist Studies is that it, while mostly was concerned with academic study of socialism, it also had, especially at some points, strong activist parts to it as well. There were some congresses or learneds where there was either some big issue or a person who might have been on tour, a refugee, someone who happened to be passing by at the same time as the Congress was on, who would get a session, sometimes planned at the very last minute. And quite often that turned into a demonstration, a march, occasionally a musical interlude or something like that, so that there was real encouragement for people to think of our society as not just being a bunch of academics sitting around talking about things, important as that may be, and and I think it is important. But if you're cognizant at all about the word praxis, there were at least sporadically efforts to join theory and practice together and do things. Sometimes those happen between congresses. I can remember a couple of times where some issue came up and the society had the capacity to turn out a publication in between, so something would appear in March or December or something that was about that, and it had good circulation. We had a good list right across Canada and sometimes overseas as well to circulate those publications and either alert people to an upcoming or new issue, or else some activist thing that they could do. Shifting topics rapidly. Once I get done, I'm going to go out. That doesn't mean I'm leaving in protest. I'm going to go and get an artifact from the table, I hope. But I'll mention it anyway. The banner that you see on the front of the table has three colors to it. The person who designed that was a fellow named Chris Borst. He was a student activist, and I think he got an academic position in McMaster or someplace like that, and then maybe he's still at it. In any case, somebody said that we ought to have some kind of banner just to show where we were. And so lo and behold, Chris shows up with this design for a banner that was desperately simple. It's a 3-color bars, and the black one stands for anarchism, the red one stands for socialism, and the green one for the environment. And we've tried a lot of the time when we were printing something to make sure that those colors were incorporated. We weren't always successful in doing that. There were times when one of the bars was missing, either that or that particular point went away. But nonetheless, when you come to Congress and you see the banner, that's where that meaning came from. Immodestly, I will also say that I sewed the banner. In fact, I sewed 3 of them because when the banner was decided on and the colors, the next Congress, I think, was at St. Catharines, and the auditorium we got was marvelously set up to hang these banners. So we The banners, I think, are about 20 feet long, and it hung from the top of the stage right down to the floor, and one of them hung over the entrance so that when people came into the AGM, the banners were there with spotlights on them, you know, so there is an element of showpersonship about how these colors and banners might be used. Another banner that I don't know if we even still have it, it's the rainbow banner with the words P-A-C-E, pace, peace, and I guess Italian. Somebody else assembled that for the society and gave it to the society to have on our tables, and sometimes it's there. I know that I was asking Radhika about what she got in the box, and she got at least one of the color banners, and I don't know if the Pache one showed up, but it's probably in the trunk of somebody's car at this point, or in their closet, or who knows where it is. We'll see if we can find them once again. I'll stop there, and I'll dart out and get this thing and come back.
Just go give you a quick rundown of how I got involved, and then a little bit about some of the things that we used to do in those days in our sessions. I didn't pay much attention to the society until about the mid-70s, I suppose. I was busy as a graduate student in the late 60s, and then busy getting started as a teacher in the early 70s. But started coming to sessions and occasionally giving a paper in the late 70s, early 80s. The society in those days, for quite a few years, I'm not sure how far back, but it run mostly out of Winnipeg. The Winnipeg group made sense to have it centralized there. Of course, Jesse and Alice Morris were very instrumental in that. Jesse, I think, was the secretary-treasurer, but also more or less ran the national office, and did a hell of a good job of it, too. I guess the Winnipeg people got a bit tired of doing all that work by themselves, and about the mid-80s, they decided better get another local to sort of look after most of that, and they happened upon Regina. I think the reason they said that was there seemed to be quite a few people from Regina that came to the sessions and occasionally gave papers. So they thought, well, we've got enough interest there, Regina could do it. So they proposed that to at the so-called, we called them the Learneds in those days, kind of a pretentious name. We used to often refer to them as the stupid. We'd say, you're going to stupid this year. They proposed that to us, those of us that went to the meetings that year. Would we take the thing over, and who could we draft as president of the thing? So they said, we talked about it, said sure, and they said, well, Brown here can be president. So I agreed to be president and became president in the year 86. I was president for 1 year. I didn't do a good job of it. I'm not a good administrator. If you ever saw my office at the University of Regina in the old days, you'd know that. Somebody got lost in our department, they always blamed it on me. And half the time they were right.
I can vote for that.
So I was president that year, and I think, you know what kind of a perfectionist Jesse was. He looked after every detail. I think at times he probably felt like murdering me that year. And if he had done so, he'd have probably got off on justifiable homicide. So towards the end of that year, I told Jesse, he was the one who knew how everything ran. He had all the connections with the SSHRC or whatever they called it those days. And I said, Jesse, this doesn't make any sense. You're the one who essentially makes the decisions. You know how the hell everything works. You should be president. And it took some convincing to get him to agree to that. Jesse was such a modest guy that he never wanted to be in the limelight, even though he did all the work. And so I proposed that to the annual meeting that year, and they made Jesse president. So from what appeared there then, Jesse was president, and the central office was in Winnipeg. The program committee, we called the Regina Local the program committee that got ready for the Learners, was in Regina, and I was program director probably for 7 or 8 years there, from about 87 to maybe the mid-90s. I was succeeded by Joe Roberts, who was very active in our local as program director. Joe was a very key figure too. Joe would have liked to have come this year. Joe is 86, and will be in June. And he's still active in many ways, but not as much as he used to be. Just leaving a discussion of that period, Jesse and Alice were very key. I grew up and they were just such hellishly good people. I grew up in rural Saskatchewan. We had an expression for people like that. The expression was, they don't make them any better. And if that applied to anybody, it applied to Jesse and Alice. Just damn good people that did an awful lot for the world, not just for social studies. I'm sorry that Jesse, of course, is not well now and couldn't come here. Of course, Alice passed away a few years ago. Now, just a word or two about what we did in those years. Show you kind of a continuity. Well, Mike, first of all, I want to kind of pay a bit of tribute to some of the people in the Regina local and beyond that were very active in that program committee. I'll go through quickly. It's interesting that about half of them are deceased. We spend a lot of time when we get older going to memorials. Those people were Barry Anderson, Jim McCrory, Doug Taylor, Ron Bourgeau, Dave Broad, Sheila Roberts, Laurie Foster, Bernie Gruel, Alicia Brzezinski, Phil Hansen, Barry Barlow, and some more. About half of those, Barry Anderson, Jim McCrory, Doug Taylor, Dave Broad, Sheila Roberts, Barry Barlow, and Alicia Brzezinski are all deceased. So a lot of them are gone. Alicia just about a week ago, sometime last week, at the relatively young age of 68. She was in Regina for many years in sociology and then moved to Waterloo, where she had been for many years. And there were a number of others that weren't in Regina that worked with us a lot. One was A.L. Sharp, of course, with Fernwood Books, was really key. And another was Tom Milgrove from the English department in Scotland. He was a specialist in Dickens. I think Tom may not be living, I'm not sure, but I haven't seen or heard from him for years. He used to edit the Bulletin for years. He did a damn good job of it too. Now the type of, I'll just give you a couple of things. I brought an old bulletin with me. I glanced through a few old bulletins to see what we used to do as learners. I've forgotten a lot of it. And give you an idea of the kind of thing we're into, because you'll see a continuity that probably started before us. And the socialist movement started back in the early part of the 20th century. The socialists have been talking about much the same thing for about 100 years, as you would imagine, as it evolves. Incidentally, we used to use paper a lot more than we do now. This was before we were into everything being technological. So we insisted that everybody bring 10 copies of their paper, 10 printed copies of their paper to the conference. We'd sell those. That's partly how we financed ourselves. And then later we'd sell reprints of those. And of course, as we started putting out annuals, we would sell the annuals, but also sell reprints from the annuals that you could get through the bulletin. I'll give you an idea of some of those things. Bulletin number 5, or annual number 5, I've forgotten what year this would be, about the early 80s, I think. Or no, the mid to late 80s. And this one was, here are some of the things that were for sale out of the bulletin papers. Roxana Amy, Sexism, Racism, and Canadian Nationalism. Emeralda Thornhill, Focus on Black Women. Marley Klein, Women's Oppression and Racism, a Critique of the Feminist Standpoint. Alicia Brzezinski, What is Patriarchy? Ron Bourgeau, Race, Class, and Gender, Colonial Domination of Indian Women. and on it went. So what we were dealing with there, a lot of different meaning to the learns was the intersection between race, class, and gender. It's talked about a lot in those years. You'll know of them. Of course, it's talked about a lot today, and it was talked about long before we were around. So it's kind of a continuing theme of the 19th century. Of the 20th century. And the other theme that we talked about a lot, and we still do, is imperialism. Naturally, that's something that socialists often talk about. The first socialist revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, took place at the end of a war caused by inter-imperialist rivalry. So imperialism has always been very important. The socialism, which then calls it the highest stage of capitalism. In the session of 1992, we emphasized that, especially because 1992 is the 500th anniversary of when Columbus supposedly discovered America. Of course, he didn't discover America, as we all know. People living there for many thousands of years. And the 1992 big celebrations over in Spain. Hooray! Columbus discovered the so-called New World, etc., etc. But all over the rest of the world, people were saying, bastards, you've done this for 500 years. Let's put that 2 minutes to go. I'll give you an idea of what was in there. We put out an annual that year based on some of the sessions. And I won't go into, my time's nearly up, so I won't go into all of the people that worked on that annual. One of them was Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, the American who has written a lot about Aboriginal people in the United States. She did an article called Aboriginal People and Imperialism in the Western Hemisphere. And another was Harry Magdoff from Monthly Review, who did an article, Globalization and Historical Perspective. Another by Joe Robbins, The Problem of Imperialism for Social Democracy, etc. So we were kind of into many of the same things that we're into today. There's a continuity there. We go into that before we were around and afterwards. So I'll drop it there.
And then, Marjorie, you can start.
Thank you. I think my first contact with socialist studies when I was asked to write something for it, and I had seen the bulletin, and I thought, well, they aren't going to be awfully demanding, but they were, actually. It was more rigorous than it looked like from its very modest exterior. And there, as you see, there were very good people in it. So despite my gray hair, I haven't been formally connected with an office until fairly recently, although I usually participated at Congress when I was at Congress, and I did occasionally write for the Bulletin. So in some sense, I'm a fraud in this history session, unlike the others. But anyway, I will give my experience, because I will talk about the organization, how we organize. I mean, others have, but it did change. So my formal relationship began in June 2013 after the AGM, where apparently no one wanted to be vice president. So Elaine and Bill had been given the Amazonian task by the executive of getting someone to do this. Also, no one volunteered for program chair for next year once Ingo had stepped down. So they drafted Tom Workman and Gene Chapman to do that. So I joined the executive with the following people, and there's Kensha and Sarkar, who was the president up there, Matt Brett, who was the secretary, David Huxtable, the treasurer, and Ben Levy, who did outreach. And not everyone, I think you and I were the only two who were were in academic positions. The other were either students or not, you just working somewhere. So the executive, I think that people who worked hard on executives also often aren't given the kind of credit that needs to be done, because they worked very hard and we had a lot to do. So mine is very much a perspective of someone coming into a long-standing organization that appeared to be somewhat muted, at least in terms of membership and outreach at that time. Although there were certainly a lot of bright spots, particularly with regard to the redesign and the renewal of the journal so that it looked professional too. So So I want to note at the 2014 annual meeting, which was the first one I attended as a member of the executive, only 22 people came to the annual meeting. So that gives you some sense of, just some lack of interest at least. So as might be expected in Canada, the executive could not meet in person. And in fact, I'd never met any of the other executive members until our first Congress meeting. So I only met them through email and occasionally we would have conference calls. So it was a good, hardworking executive with Matt on top of communications, Ben's upgrading lists and the website, I think, and David keeping on top of finances and trying to come to terms with the fact that we had a hell of a lot of money that we weren't spending. So that was always a big thing to talk about. And then Ken Shan chairing and guiding, and he was the one with the most experience over all of this. So immediately became apparent to me that how decisions were made and who had the authority was something of an issue that we talked about a lot. Because some members on the executive felt that changes could not be made by the executive itself, that if any major decisions were going to be made, they had to be taken up to the Hive for authentication. So in practice, the Hive was, who knows, people out there on email. We didn't know who they were, or I didn't. I think others on the executive did. So in practice, what this meant was that an email would get sent to what might have been the total membership list, so I don't really know who it was. And if anyone objected at all, then the issue was defeated. And so a consensus method in determining anything, now which in theory is wonderful, particularly if you meet and can talk and to reason. But if you just, anyway, that became, as feminists learned early on, saying no is very, very powerful, and that becomes the most powerful voice in the room or in the organization. So, and sometimes a member of the Hive would be very, very forceful, particularly if they had an idea that we should not spend money on anything. So that was kind of interesting. So as a result, some strange things did happen, such as racking up quite a bit of money on savings accounts that just wasn't spent, even when we could support it for various things. So others on the executive felt that the executive could and should make decisions within the normal bounds of what executives do. Now this may all sound acrimonious, but oddly it was not. We worked very, very well together, although sometimes it was a bit frustrating, particularly when trying to organize Congress. Still, it was an executive with goodwill, and people really did respect each other. Now, the big problem was the Constitution was absolutely no help at all because it was very silent on basic issues of organization, like what constituted the executive and what were its duties. So you'd have something on the website that would say who the executive was, and you have something in the Constitution that said something quite different. So we didn't even really know who was on the executive. So what had happened is that practice of the organization had greatly outstripped the dated Constitution, and one that I think had never gone through a revision other than when it had first been done. So I set about the first set of constitutional revisions. There's been another set since then, and they were passed at the 2014 annual meeting with the main objective to codify what was going on and just say this is how we do it, and what it becomes standard practices. And the only proposed amendment that was defeated was the one about local chapters, and I'd suggested we delete this because no one was sure that there ever had been any, or that there ever would be any. But some people, in characteristic optimism of socialism, the motion kept the local chapters, and that was very much thanks to Frank Cunningham, who I'm sure has organized a local chapter since then, haven't you, Frank?
Yeah, and we had, at the beginning, there were local chapters in several places.
Oh, there were, okay.
In particular in British Columbia.
Oh, okay.
and in Toronto, but also in Ottawa, and I think for a while in Regina.
See, there's a history there that we have to have in order to know these things. That's good.
Pretty
So my mother, the other major contribution that I had was to propose that the Society of Socialist Studies have a book prize. And it appears it was something that had been suggested and voted on and approved of previously, but that it hadn't actually been carried out. So the members of the first committee were me, Frank Cunningham, Jamie Lawson, and Tom Workman. And at some point, Meg Luxton told us that she'd already named that prize that a long, long time ago, so that there was no discussion about this, was the Earl Sharp Book Prize. So we didn't argue about that. It became the Earl Sharp Book Prize. So the current committee is Frank Cunningham, Bapasha Baruha, and Meg Buxton. So the books, and me. And the books that have won so far were Jerome Klassen's Joining Empire, The Political Economy of the New Canadian Foreign Policy. Last year, Gordon Laxer's After the Sand, Energy and Ecology Security for Canadians. That was by Douglas McIntyre, and the publisher. And then this year, finally, we have The Blood of Extraction by Tom Gordon and Jeffrey Weber. That's a Canadian imperialism in Latin America. And that is a Fernwood. So I think Earl is happy this year that his press finally won something. So I have seen, in a fairly short period of time, the spectacular reinvention of a very important academic institution. The journal has now grown into respectability from the pamphlet, the way it looked, and new scholars are now attracted to the organization. It's wonderful to see how many young people are coming to this and are taking an active part in the development. And particularly, what is important, I mean, it's very clear from the history that what has been considered marginal in academia has been a part, an essential part of what's going on here. And that is continuing in this kind of tradition, which is very important. So the struggles to be more inclusive are really important. Gendered issues of all kinds, indigenous perspectives are more recently part of it all, anti-racist issues. So I think no one now resists these issues as part of scholarship, but socialist studies were very early in it. So I think we're still a small group of people who are very active in the organization, but it's clear that this needs to expand. But I think it's something to be very proud of.
I'm going to repeat some themes that we've already heard because that's the nature of the beast, I guess, as we proceed through the panel. But I guess I was aware of social studies as a graduate student at York in the late 1970s. And in 1980, I was part of a reading group on capitalist crisis led by Dale Martin, who was one of the original editors of the first social studies journal. But I didn't really become active in social studies until sometime incrementally in the 1990s. I'm not quite sure exactly when. But at that time, as we've already heard, social studies was really centered on the prairies. Its actual center of gravity was somewhere between Regina and Winnipeg, maybe a little west of Brandon. In the sense that Jesse Borst, comprising half of the Alice and Jesse team, was president, secretary-treasurer, president, something like that. And the Regina Collective was really actively engaged in pulling together the annual conference. But perhaps most impressive to me at this point is that we can actually look back on 50 years, half a century of socialist studies. How many academic organizations coming out of the New Left are still around? And not just still around, but how many are offering conferences with 89 sessions plus a play by my unofficial count? Equally impressive, I think, is that we can look back on the first half century with the sense that the best years still lie ahead. And by best years, I don't mean peaches and cream, I mean effective struggle. In academia, we struggle over, to a great extent, over ideas. And we all know Henry Kissinger's famous line, right, that academic politics are so vicious precisely because the stakes are so small. But still, what might seem to be small stakes gain importance when we notice that the knowledge produced in university does get taken up in other fields. And without social studies as a relatively coherent but richly diverse community of scholars and activists, the left's presence in Canada's academic life would be much weaker, and the hegemonies that shore up the ruling bloc would be much stronger. So when I say the best years lie ahead, what I'm flagging is, at least what I see as sharpening contradictions of capitalism. And Perhaps instead of quoting Kissinger, we should recall Mao's pronouncement, another Mao quote, everything under heaven is in utter chaos. The situation is excellent. Socialist studies, of course, has from the start been a creature, or almost from the start, been a creature of crisis. It was formed at the climax of capitalism's post-war boom, but within a few years, in the midst of the first generalized international recession since the 1930s, the political landscape had begun to shift from the Keynesian consensus to an emerging neoliberalism that gained shape and form by the early 1980s. At its inception, as Frank has already told us, the Socialist Studies project was broadly framed and non-sectarian. If we compare the first issue of the Socialist Studies Journal, which came out in 1979, with early issues of sister organizations, Labor le Travail and Studies in Political Economy, the wide scope of socialist studies is evident. We see in that first issue articles on philosophy, politics, culture, history, political economy. As for sectarianism, there was plenty to go around in the 1970s. But again, as Frank has already said, in socialist studies, various leftists, from communists to social democrats, right from the inception, often sworn enemies in other contexts, collaborated in an open space. And this is still true. Now, a key to socialist studies longevity, I think, has been how we've been able to move with the times. Socialist studies embraced a socialist feminist perspective and a triadic analysis of race, class, and gender in the late 1970s. As has been mentioned, looking at the bulletin, you can see that it was there already in the mid to late 1970s. And by the 1980s, the Socialist Study Annual was taking up crucial issues of how the just disparate yet convergent strands of social movement activism could be braided into an open socialist project. Eco-socialist analysis also started to gain traction in the 1980s. One of Laurie Adkins' first articles was in the 1988 annual that Frank co-edited. In the decades since, to jump cut a bit, socialist studies and the broad left have faced the challenge of postmodernism as intellectual current and as social condition that carries its own fragmenting dynamic, along with the intensification of identity politics, which often is no more than a new term for liberal pluralism. You can see this in the current federal government's initiatives in what Charles Hale has termed neoliberal multiculturalism. Both of these express in part the weakening of the labor left after Fordism. And both, I think, have fed into the new anarchism. Now, noting that black is one of our colors on the banner, I think in approaching the new anarchism, the need for dialogue is obvious, for at least three reasons. First of all, most activists today, certainly most of the politically radical students I teach, identify as anarchists, not as socialists. Secondly, anarchism, though highly accessible to disenchanted liberals, is intrinsically limited as a transformative politics. I'm going to make that claim and not defend it. But we can talk about it. And yet, socialist politics needs an anarchist touch, a critical reflexivity about issues of leadership, planning, and prefiguration, so that we are bringing into existence the practices and the kinds of people that can effect radical transformation of our troubled world. So I think socialist studies can provide an open space for discussion between socialists and anarchists, precisely because we have avoided sectarianism over this half century. And in my view, the most important current of identity politics in Canada today is Indigenous. But what we have at stake here is much more than identity. With Nancy Fraser, I think we can see Indigenous resistance and resurgence as a blending of a politics of identity with a politics grounded in political economic injustice, as well as the struggle for self-determination. To the extent that these vectors of anti-colonialism point in a transformative direction, Indigenous politics becomes a key catalyst in the struggle for socialism. Now, of course, complexities abound. A catalyst is not simply an agent. A catalyst does not simply add force to a trend. It transforms. So a transformative cultural politics in particular does not proceed on the basis of reified identities, but is open to the practice of radical deconstruction, including taking apart the dualism of indigenous and settler, which covers over so much diversity on both sides of its categories. In my view, decolonization without a broader socialist transformation that breaks the power of capital to accumulate by dispossession and exploitation is unlikely. And a movement towards socialism that does not embrace decolonization is a contradiction in terms. So this brings us to the question, the key question for me, what is it to struggle for socialism in our time and place? And I like Barry Adams' definition of socialism, which he provided a number of years ago now, and of socialists. Socialism is not the movement of the working class, although achieving socialism is impossible without the broad and active support of the class whose alienated labor produces capital. Rather, socialists are those, to quote Barry, who understand their praxis within a comprehensive worldview that recognizes and supports subordinated people wherever they exist. Socialism is a principled politics of social justice founded not on identity, but on ethics. In its first 50 years, socialist studies has kept that comprehensive critical worldview alive in and beyond the Canadian Academy. But as I've said, the best years and the greatest challenges still lie before us. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, I presume that I'm here mainly to talk about the journal and kind of how that has evolved. I will say that I think that I literally inherited socialist studies from my father. I certainly remember receiving the orange bulletins at the house and reading them over and so on. When I was growing up, so I think I literally kind of inherited it. And when I started going to Congress as a PhD student, I went to the sociology meetings, and then I went to the socialist meetings, and I just found the socialist meetings more interesting than the sociology meetings, and ended up spending more and more time there. So that's sort of how I got involved, and I think also that Bill Carroll was involved, and actually he was he's been quite an important mentor to me in the sense that when I was at Stanford University, I had Mark Granabetter, Doug McAdam, and John Myers supervisors, and they couldn't understand anything that I was doing. And when I first went to present my work at the time on the multilateral agreement on investment, Bill Carroll actually understood and said, "Oh, you should read Gramsci." I thought, "Oh, who's this person?" And I did. And anyway, so he's been an important mentor to me, and I think the fact that he was involved, helped me to feel welcome and that I could also be involved in the society. So that's how I've got in. And actually, we've been on with Gene Chapman on one of the Congress organizing committees. I'm on it again this year. I might have been on it again another year. It all blurs together after a while. So yeah, I've been involved in various capacities, but I think the most important was really being the editor of the journal. So the journal started off as the Bulletin, and then in 2005, before that actually, we decided a few years, so it was probably around 2000, Sandra Rowland Meglinson actually decided to take the Bulletin and turn it into a peer-reviewed journal. So people would send in articles, they would be peer-reviewed, it would become a respectable journal. And actually, I prepared a package this morning which included that actually last night because I was worried I was going to forget it, and so I put it in like a bag, and then I forgot the bag at home. Anyway, so it was actually a physical journal, and it has the colors of the banner on it. And it looks like a peer-reviewed journal, and it has the titles and the articles and book reviews. I think it's important to signal not only Sandra Rowland Meglinson support in transforming the Bulletin into a peer-reviewed journal, but actually there was also people like Murray Cook, who for a long time did, including when I was editor, organized the book reviews, which was always quite an important section. It was a way of valorizing the work of people who were active in the society, of sharing ideas. And he did that totally autonomously. I never worried about it. I knew that he would organize, often like 10 very good book reviews, and I never had to bother about it. And so he was quite important, I think, in some ways to the society. So Anyway, I mean, it's kind of involved writing a lot of book reviews myself as a young scholar, and then it turned out that they were looking for an editor. And I don't know whether it was Bill suggested it or whether I said to Bill, I think this would be a good idea, but I don't feel comfortable doing it by myself. In any case, he put me in touch with Chad Thompson, who agreed, even though we never met and didn't know each other at all, that we would co-edit. Because, but I was interested in doing it, but I didn't think I was able to do it myself. So Chad Thompson came in, and we decided that we needed to kind of reinvigorate the journal because it was important and it was doing good work, but it was maybe a little bit narrow in terms of the kind of people who were contributing. Sometimes there were only a couple of articles in each issue, and we decided that when we came together in 2009 that we would try and relaunch Socialist Studies and reinvigorate it and make it into a place that good scholars would want to contribute to, that would be good on the CV of younger scholars as well. And we were really on the same page in terms of kind of editorial vision. At the time we wanted to make it more bilingual. That never really happened, even though I'm fluent in French. We wanted to make it we wanted to ensure that it continued to be open to all sorts of perspectives. And that meant to me two things. One, it meant, on the one hand, analyses which were critically informed by a range of socialist perspectives, including socialist feminisms, anti-racist socialisms. There are indigenous socialisms. I think of Glenn Coulter's early work on indigenous communism, and I actually invited him. I told him he could write anything for the journal, and I promised I would accept it because it was self-evident 10 years ago that he was going to be brilliant, and he never wrote anything. I told him you could write anything, and I guarantee publication. So we wanted to open to those kind of perspectives, and then the other thing, after Chad Thompson had to leave after about a year and a half just because of family issues, I also decided that I wanted to make sure that I published stuff that wasn't socialist at all, and by people who didn't identify as socialist at all, but maybe had something that socialists needed to listen to. And that was particularly true of Indigenous scholarship. So I would approach Indigenous scholars who I thought were doing good work. We did an issue actually with Chad Thompson on 20 years after Genesidage, and they say, well, I'm not a socialist. And I said, I don't mind. We need to know what's going on. You have things that we need to hear. So write what you want to write and be true to your voice and your interests, and we'll publish it, and that will ensure that there's a conversation going between Indigenous scholarship and perspectives you're bringing and what's going on in socialist inquiry. So that was the way we approached a lot of the work. I know we did really everything. So actually when Chad Thompson was there, we didn't have any support at all. It was me and him and an online system, and that was it. So that meant we did all of the reviewing. We had to go out and get good articles a lot of the time. I started an interview series because I wanted to bring high profile into the journal who might not want to contribute an article but might be happy to talk about their work. So we did an interview by Bill Carroll with Dorothy Smith, for example. There was actually one by of Himani Banerjee by Shireen Razik, but the tape recording quality was so bad it couldn't be rescued, which is really unfortunate. We did one with David McNally, one with Bill Carroll that I did. I did all of the transcripts for that, so I listened to them for hours and hours and wrote up all the transcripts. In the meantime, Chad Thompson and I would go soliciting articles. Chad would proofread everything, send it back to the author, format everything, use the online system, get it on, and put it out. So we did everything ourselves. It was a really totally in-house operation. When he left, I knew I could do the technical part myself, and I was sitting in Paris, and I got this. It was an incredible coincidence. I was sitting in my office in Paris thinking, what am I going to do about this? And I get this email from this guy called Sean King, who I'd known as a University of Toronto student when we both worked on the Spend Robinson campaign and were variously involved in anti-austerity politics. And he said, hey, I'm in Paris. What are you doing? I know you haven't heard from me in 20 years, but I found you on the internet, and here I am, and here you are. I run a publishing company, so an online, and I help support online publishing. So if you know we need something, here I am. And I was like, should we ever talk? And actually, we haven't seen each other. So we correspond. I haven't actually seen him in person, in 25, 30 years. And I said, we need you absolutely. And that's how Sean came in to do all of the online work and actually all of the formatting, which was a huge relief for the journal, tremendous relief. And he's so kind of helpful, kind, wonderful. And usually I had authors saying, "You promised me this was going to be out 3 months ago. What is going on? You promised me. You promised me." And he would always, as soon as I got the issue done, he would have it done within like 48 hours every time. So as soon as I had all the text together, he would do it. He would finish it. He would get it out, which was pretty important. Probably extremely stressful for him. And he's been really helpful, and actually got involved in the organization in I think other ways. So we're, I think, very fortunate to have him, and I think that's not minor. Support people like that, or good support people, are really critical to keeping things going. So what were some of the things we did? So we did interviews, we did special issues. One of the things I knew in order to increase kind of the broader respectability of the journal was that it's easier to attract high-profile scholars to special issues. So G.A. Cohen had come out with a book, Why Not Socialism? And I thought, well, he's a major figure within socialism. It's important to get a couple of people involved. So I asked Christine Sipnowich, who's a very famous G.A. Cohen scholar, if she would be happy to write, that we were going to have this special issue, and if she would be happy to write a preface. And she said yes. So I said, great. So then I could write to other G.A. Cohen scholars and say, we're having a special issue. By the way, Christine Sipnowich is going to write the preface to it. Would you like maybe to participate? And then I got someone else named Ian Narveson, who's not at all socialist. He's actually libertarian. But I knew he was going to attract people, right? So he said yes because Christine Sipnowich said yes. And then, if they had said yes, I wrote to Kai Nielsen, who doesn't actually use the internet. So everything, all of our correspondence and all of the corrections happened in this incredible scrawl, sometimes with his life story added, to the thing, going back and forth. And he got involved, and then this young woman, I saw that she presented on G.A. Cohen a paper. I asked to see it. It was a brilliant paper. I said, "Can you give it to us?" And Yippee, she was in Cambridge, I think. She said, "Yes, but it's coming out in a book in a year." And I said, "I don't care. I guarantee publication within 3 months, and you can just give us credit, right?" And then we're also in a nice book, with a good press, with a Cambridge scholar. So she agreed, and so this is how it went. And those issues were a huge amount of work. I think I contacted nearly 100. And then once the word got out, other people wanted to contribute, and actually even people I contributed to be reviewers said, "Oh my goodness, if there's going to be a special issue on G.A. Cohen, I have to be in it. Can I submit a paper?" So it kind of spiraled. It was a huge amount of work. As I say, I think I contacted between 70 to 100 external reviewers at various points for various papers. But it was, I think, one of the first issues where there was high-profile scholars, as well as young new scholars, talking about a major figure, and I think it helped kind of set the tone to say, look, this journal is serious, has to be taken seriously, and so on. We did other issues on many different topics. We did one on transgressive pedagogy and research, and actually people like Roxana Ng, who I'd invited to the editorial board. She never wrote the paper because she died quite suddenly, but had promised to do issues for that. And I would like to signal the support of the editorial board too. I would call up people like Roxana Ng, and I would say, you do really important kind of anti-racist, feminist work looking at labor. I don't care whether we identify as socialist or not. We need to signal to potential writers, and especially potential young people, that we're interested in your kind of work, anti-racist work, anti-racist work, feminist, socialist work looking at labor. And she said, sure. I said, just lend your luster and, whatever, and so on. The same thing with Dorothy Smith, Bill Carroll agreed to be on the board, Manny Banerjee, people like this. So we wanted to signal through who we brought to the board that we were open and interested in a range of principles and perspectives. Another thing was, in the early days, it was really difficult getting really good papers. So anytime I heard anyone who did anything interesting at a conference, or I saw an interesting paper, I said, send it to us. I'll fast track it for publication. What else did we do? Okay, 2 minutes. I think we were successful in making the journal more international. So if you look at over the 5 years, there was articles from Spain, China, the UK, Germany, France, South Africa. So it was also to say that socialism is international. The journal should also be international. It's sort of its import. And one of the things I was happy with, even though I'm not especially a fan of Harvard, especially having gone to Stanford and knowing what the Ivy League systems are like and all that kind of thing, but still it was important for the journal that the Harvard librarian wrote a review of the journal. I didn't ask or anything. She just wrote one saying that it was a journal that should be in libraries and that people should be reading and using it. And I think that was important. That was in 2014, and we stuck it on the website to show people that you can be socialist, and you can use that also because functionally you need it to advance in your career in mainstream journals. So those are some of the kind of concerns. And then Sandra Rain, in a moment of optimism, I had decided right away that I wouldn't stay on for more than 5 years. It's important for other people to come in. You don't want to become a fiefdom or too upset, centered around your own interests. She agreed, and energies, and you want to institutionalize things, so she agreed to take it over and has come up with 2 issues since, and is doing an incredible job. She's doing this on top of a full-time job. I did it when I had 3 kids, but I have to say I was also on parental leave, and I think that actually helped. So there you go.